If you have a topic that you would like to present at this or future events, please contact one of us through the Meetup apps, or you can ask our email or something like that. If any of your are willing to or provide lunch or something like that, you can also let us know. Say no if you orders food pizza or something like that. Anyway, we'll go ahead and start it. From Sorenson Impact Center. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
Yeah, great, thanks. So I'll talk a little bit about the center in a minute, but thanks to my colleague John and our other colleague Gwen's in the audience here. We are an applied research sort of consultee section of the business school at the University of Utah, but it's a little different in that we get to help mostly like nonprofit and governments with their data. Fun work if you're into trying to do social good with data science. Projects in Oregon, Utah, California, and all across the country on things like education, recidivism, and lots of homelessness, lots of really interesting topics. So that's where we come at this, and producing these reports for non-technical audiences. A lot of our challenge convention, how do we show what we're trying to do to this non-technical audience in a way that's very accessible, like a Word document or something. So that's to kind of set things up, is we wanted to be able to produce these reports pretty easily from our code for audiences like school district employees and nonprofit leaders, et cetera, et cetera. So see right at the top is thank you for coming and being here. Please feel free to interrupt me with questions or comments, because I think the defining feature of R is that there's more than one way, there's more than 100 ways to do just about anything that you want to do. And so a lot of this is our kind of personal preference and our style that we worked out together. But I'd be really interested to hear how you do some of this. So please feel free to chime in at any point. I'll get into what we'll be covering today. So just go over really quickly in our Markdown Refresher. Specifically, kind of zoom in on docx reports to create a Word document out of your code. And then we'll talk about how to put that into your own package that you can then use again easily over and over again, without automating that with the wonderful package editor. And as a refresher, how many of you use the R Markdown notebooks? Just because how many of you use Markdown? Basically everyone. Great. Okay. So you all know the facility with which Markdown just makes everything easier and better. To me, it's like steam engine, computing, and then Markdown is like the next greatest invention. Going from this messy HTML to like a little hash to signify everything. It's amazing. And I didn't know, going back on this, that like Aaron Schwartz, the famous programmer hacker who was on by MIT's legal team and tries to change the line. I didn't know he was a major player in this. It has a really cool history, but it's also really new. I didn't know 2004. Somehow I thought I'd been using it a lot longer. The specific brand of R Markdown is something called Sundown, but specifically the notebooks, R Markdown notebooks, we'll talk about a lot today. You're able to use different languages, as you know, Python, SQL, other language engines, code to any of a number of formats. So that's the beauty, is you take your code and turn it into something that others can consume very easily. So that's HTML, PDF, Word, Beamer, HTML slides, text-to-style handbooks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's all there. At the top, there's some other notebooks these days that might have a little bit better language integration. I found that the one drawback, since I'm talking mostly about all the great things about R Markdown notebooks, is that when you're trying to go from it doesn't transfer like cell to cell. But you can't pass an object from one to another. So you're kind of left with, if you want to do something in Python, you could display the output. But if you wanted to do something in Python and then say, clean your data in Python and then give it to R to plot, you kind of have to save it as a CSV or Feather object and then bring it back in there. I think there's more they could do with that, and they probably will in the future, is my guess. And just to give you a view that most of you are familiar with, but you start out with the Markdown here. So in this case, it's a double header. You can put in code chunks, the code that you're going to run. And this leads to the great debate of should you have inline chunks or not. I know there's some strong opinions here. I personally love them. I know some people who do not. but so you can always X that out, right? But anyway, this is what is then producing this. At the top, these slides are all R Markdown. And so literally that code that you just saw from my R Markdown or from my RStudio browser section is producing this slide here. You got the, most of what is like translated into HTML, and then your code chunk, which then produces this output. Wonderful looking slide. Some of you will remember the precursor to R notebooks, R Markdown notebooks. Python notebook, which subsequently became Jupyter notebooks. But I remember working on these many years ago, and it was like so hard. Back in the day, these were only on Linux for a long time, and this was like a new revolution, and people would go way out of their way to like to create these despite difficulty, because it was for the first time code and the output all integrated pretty seamlessly, that you could then create these great reports. And I think it mimicked for a lot of us, like data scientists, the idea of a lab notebook, that you're taking your notes, you're seeing your output, that's like closely integrated. So it was a pain in the ass to use these IPython notebooks. I think Jupyter has become a lot easier, but I think it really set the stage for what has Markdown notebook. So R Markdown solved a lot of these problems, specifically, and then combining your code and output, which, as I said, already kind of solved in some ways by Python notebooks, but then facilitated by RStudio, but not required. So I think that's the beauty of them in some ways, is that I could pass off the code. And by the way, our presentation will be on GitHub. We'll share the link. You could go in and commit or clone our repo and just get the same presentation. RStudio or not. Great thing about that is then you have everything in plain text. And plain text means, of course, you can version control. You can track every little change without problems. Python or Jupyter notebooks in a while. But last I did, everything was kind of in this JSON format, and it was version control. It wasn't just like a plain text that any old text editor could open up. It's kind of like more facilitated by the GUI. It sort of required that. I've seen them advance, but last I saw it was like a very popular Stack Overflow question about how do I version control this? So RStudio solves that. You have it all in plain text. It's all just hashes, little backticks, and things like that that you can see version by version. So that's a really advantage of RStudio notebooks, in my opinion. Any questions about the basic format, basic idea behind R Markdown or Markdown notebooks? Any thoughts so far? On to, oh yeah, good.
Just as a comment, the little gear in each code chunk you can turn off. There's all the settings for your code output. You can set that in your global options at the top if you really care about whether each code chunk outputs in line.
Yeah, oh yeah, thanks. That's a good point. Yeah, like you can set your global options so you can have, yeah. So yeah, that's what I'm saying. There's a fierce debate. Some people don't like to see it right here in their running code and have an output be over here somewhere. So you can set that, of course, in your global options. Another couple things, I mean, just for those uninitiated, the like chunk by chunk, which is nice. You can run all chunks before this chunk. there's a lot you can do with the RStudio integration. So while it's not required, RStudio makes it very easy to work with and very nice. But thank you for putting that out. The output we get. And like I say, we just needed something that had a little bit our style and branding and logo, some images to make it look a little bit nice, plots, the tables that look presentable to a lay audience, and we wanted to output to Word. So that was what we were dealing with. So we started to research this. How do you get a good Word output? I'm going to share a little bit about that. So here's an example page from one of our documents. This was looking at police calls here in Salt Lake City. And this is what the code looks like that created that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this. I'll flip back in a second. This one little hash mark here would be like a header one. And then you go through and you can do like regular Markdown where you have hyperlinks, loading the data. So I'm saying echo false, so you're not seeing the code. So like here's a little code chunk that's invisible on the Word document, obviously. Most of my Word documents have the echo equals false, meaning they're not looking at the code, they're just looking at the output. And then you just go in and like, I mean, how many of us were like writing 15 lines of comments or description and then having to comment all that out, each one with a little hash mark. This makes it so it's just easier, I think, to write your description, to write what you're doing, to write about the code. It's on the code and the chunks. So again, the one little hash mark has this overview, which has a like, kind of dark line. And then you go through and see our nicely formatted table. So how do we get there? How do we go from code to this sort of output? There's a pretty simple workflow, and because I'm sharing the links here, I'm going to great detail here. But you'll be able to, as I said, for this and then follow along. But the basic idea is that you start with an R Markdown document. You output it to Word, and then that'll spit out a Word document, which you could then take that Word document and style it how you'd like to, and go back and make that your style reference. So kind of a funny workflow, and the link will explain a little better, or maybe clicky. But you're basically creating this Word document and then using that as your style reference in the header of your Markdown document. Questions or thoughts? So let me give you a concrete example of how that might work. So right now, let's assume we've done this little workflow. So we have like a Word document on our computer that we can use as our style reference point. Create a page break. I mean, this is a useful example, right? You don't want to have just go on and on and on. Internally, you want to be able to break pages by like kind of themes or something. So what we did here, this is a little sneaky because obviously in Word, usually when you put in a page break, it's like GUI, like insert page break, right? But you can do this in the styling. So style heading 5. And you can do this in Word. So now we're in Word doing this. And you're going to set the font color to white, font size, and then select page break before in the line page breaks tab. So all this is happening in Word. And basically what that means is now when you put in like a heading 5, so when I have 5 little hashes, and just to remind myself, let me go back to the code for a half second. I just always say page break, right? And it's in white text and visible. But if you were to like copy and paste the Word document and put it into plain text, you would see that little page break text. But anyway, that's basically the gist of how you get from code to a like, and there's a lot more you can do with that. So once you get that down, you can start to make your, page breaks look a certain way. You can make your header 1, like in this case, overview, and then, like I said, it's got this kind of like blue background. You go in and change the default colors to match your color scheme. You go in and change the tables to look a certain way. So there's a lot you can do in Word that you can like has a kind of analogy in the headers and the different kind of formats in R Markdown. Okay. That's the basics of the Word document, and I think the same principles apply to a lot of the other outputs. As you create an output and then style that, and then you refer to that as your style reference point. Heading of the R Markdown document. So we wanted to be able to create images that had a specific, that kind of matched that. So what we did is we first styled the Word documents, the colors that we use, and then we went in and have our own kind of color scheme for all our GG plots. In this case, you can go see here, but have a with our logo on it, and do all of this in the course of our Word document. So it's all very, stylistically similar to everything else our center is producing. And so we came up with a plot that we call SIGG. This function, this package Magick, like image Magick, that you can put images over other images. Our Markdown. But let me show you the dark side of this. Because it's very easy to put GIFs onto plots. So we started going wild with this. And then others took this much further into better places than we ever thought possible. This is Mara. She's like mixing the GIFs. And just to show you what the code for that looks like. So this ends up in every one of our Markdown documents. It's basically our SIGG function for branding our plots, right? And all it does in pseudocode is roots in our logo to the right size of the plot, and then overwrites the initial plot. So it's a workflow I described and I'll link to one of my blog posts, but a nice way of branding some of your images to go along with some of your other branding. And again, it can be used to various things. Yeah,
This may be a question that's way off topic. You can tie that into Knitr as a hook so that whenever it saves those GG plots, it will automatically add the logo.
I don't.
That's a great question.
Yeah, it's a good question.
We'll look into that.
Yeah.
See if we can find an answer.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. Does anyone else have an easier method?
When you do this at our studio, ask EP if he knows how to do that.
If we can choose the background color, we can choose, we can modify a lot of arguments in a single call. So there's a lot of flexibility in that. It might not be in there, but you're right that as a default, that would be pretty cool if we could.
Yeah.
So you say this function in your package, and then you just call it package.
Well, you jump to the line ahead. But yeah, so
it might not be that important to do it.
So where I'm getting to next is exactly so basically we had this and it would be like in that, and I won't still do it center, but it would be in every one of our Markdown documents. I'm not gonna pass to Joe.
So yeah, as you correctly sort of surmised there, what we were doing for a long time in the setup chunk of our R Markdown. So every single time we started a new template, there was that, and there was a bunch of other things, right? So all these customizations that we're talking about, all the different sort of colors we had, they all really started to add up. So this chunk ended up looking like it was over 100 lines in every single R Markdown document that we were doing, which was just sort of cumbersome to scroll through every time you wanted to get to the actual meat of what you were doing. It had stuff, loading all of our libraries, setting the R Markdown Knitr options, defining the color names that we use for our company instead of using the hex codes, working directories, right? The custom themes we apply, which I'll talk about in a minute, etc. So this started to, it was getting way too big. It's probably time to create a package that contains all this so that we can pull it all out of these individual scripts. The other thing that would happen here is we might have sort of a default template that we'd start with, and it for a while lived on GitHub, but often if we wanted to create a new Markdown document we would worked on recently, delete all the code below the setup chunk and start. And so as you can imagine, it started getting messy because there might be little customizations that we'd done for this one project that didn't need to be in another one, or things that were missing. And we had all these different versions spread about. So all in all, it it wasn't clean, it wasn't working well once it started to grow and we had all these customizations. So deciding to create a package, we had sort of two groups of goals. Obviously, reduce that setup chunk, get all that stuff, move it out somewhere else. Do what we can to eliminate working directory headaches that we're all familiar with as much as possible. We wanted to make it unnecessary to set the working directory and get the working directory. Any of you who've worked with R Markdown know that it doesn't play well with those sorts of calls. Corral all our custom functions somewhere nice. And then the other thing we wanted to do was sort of address that issue of having all these different sources and copies of our template and actually put the template inside the package and be able to call it from the package whenever we created a new Markdown document. So we wanted to have this be, effortless, and we wanted it always to come from a single source so that we could version that single source and upgrade it, but keep things all. So along with those goals, we had a couple major requirements that we thought we needed to meet in order for this to actually be a useful and usable package. Being system independent across Mac, PC, or whatever else. It needed to be independent. Some of us use command line, some of us use the RStudio GUI. Wanted it to be somewhat distributable and usable outside of sort of the three core data team members. It was written obviously for us to be useful to us, but we also wanted our students who might come in and start doing some programming for us to be able to use it, or clients, because we often distribute our code along with the results of a project. So it needed to be somewhat usable out there. It needed to be future-proof, right? We wanted to make sure that if we worked on a Markdown document for a certain project and then a year later came back after having made all these changes, perhaps changing our colors in the template, etc., that we didn't break that document from a year ago. So it had to be sort of isolated from changes. So a brief refresher for anyone that hasn't done package creation, that goes into where the different components of the package live prior to compiling. It goes in a folder called R. You've got package metadata and namespaces, which description, the version number, the packages that it suggests or depends on. The namespaces talk about basically what objects from your package are going to get exported and be usable or viewable by the user. So you might have some internal functions that you use, within your other functions, and then you have other functions that you want to export. Those are the typical, functions you think of when you install a package, such as SIGG-save, for instance. Folder contains any data you want to be usable both by your functions or by the user. So if you've ever used like the cars data set or diamonds or something like that, right? All those example data sets. And then finally, there's an installed files folder, which I'll get to more in just a moment. So our first goal, reducing the setup chunk. Two things. First, there was a lot of settings that we applied, right? The Markdown options, etc., updating our ggplot defaults. So we wanted to move all those into sort of general apply setting type functions where we just had that one line in the setup chunk. So this is an example of update function that sets all the defaults we want to use for ggplots. So we make it so that by default, when we make a ggplot and just call it simple geom for geom bar or smooth without any other arguments, it automatically comes up using our typical branded colors. So we update all those defaults using update geom defaults. For the bar here, we set our specific, which is that nice green you see.
SI design is an object that has your color palette.
Exactly. So SI design is actually something that lives in that data folder, list of names associated with hex values. And so that lets us add as we go. But yeah, it's just a quick way again for us to avoid the hex values and use names that we recognize easily. So we do all that for these different geoms. We use T minimal a lot, so we apply that. So all that gets wrapped into one function, single line in our setup chunk. Same thing with functions, right? This is sort of the one thing that we use. It's very typical of a package where we took something like SIGG, say, the brand plot, and make it its own function. or sorry, I got ahead of myself. This is a different function called duplicates that we made to work with dplayer. So it just shows you all the duplicated rows based on selecting only a certain number of columns. Something that we do a lot with the data that we see commonly. Now, there was one other sort of advantage of using a package for functions like this as opposed to having them in the setup chunk. Now we can also attach help documentation with the function so that later what the arguments are, what the output is. And that all gets generated very nicely now with the DevTools and our Oxygen comments. So all of these help page where question mark duplicates and pops the standard help file that you're used to seeing. So it was really nice to be able to sort of corral all that information for later use after we've forgotten what the hell duplicates are supposed to do. Okay. So that kind of wraps up cleaning a lot of the setup chunk up. The other thing we wanted to do, like I said, was an easy way to create new R Markdown. So we decided that what we were looking for was a single function, R Markdown file, a sort of a templates subdirectory wherever that file was placed. That then gets all the supporting template files, the images, the Word styles, the CSS, whatever gets put in there. And then also, as a final touch, immediately opens the R Markdown in the RStudio editor. Again, a reminder, this is our package structure. This last one I mentioned, the installed files, is what makes it possible to do this final step. And go to the next one. So the install directory can literally hold anything you want to put in it. There's some limitations if you want to put your package on brand in terms of the size. Internally, you could put big video files if you wanted to for some reason. But that was a place where we could put all these files for our templates. And the way that this folder works is when you install the package from GitHub, so we sort it there, use DevTools install GitHub, our package name, the inst directory, you get copied into your local R library / package name folders. They're now residing there. And if you set up folder structure right, R knows to look for them as templates. So we then wrote a function that I'll show you in just a second that creates a new Markdown document based on the files that are stored in your local package library. And so the advantage of this now is, we can update anytime we want. We've got the single source, like we mentioned here, looking at our local library. Next slide. Create one or many every time we call this function, we get a new copy of the files that were here. And there's our version control, right? So the first time I did this a year ago, whatever level of, whatever version we had our package at then, templates at, I come back a year later, do a couple more calls, and it's using the newer ones. So it's always sort of future proof, and that whatever changes we make later can't affect the ones we did a year ago because they have their original template files saved along with them. Here's the draft function I mentioned. Essentially what we do, we call the function, and all we have to do is file name. And the first thing we'll do is check if they didn't give us a directory. We'll create one or use the working directory. Second thing we have to do is make sure that they've given the correct capitalization, capital R, lowercase m, d. If not, people who tend to do this incorrectly a lot get scolded. And then we use the R Markdown draft function that's customized. And basically all we have to do is give the file name, point it to the template, and this is what's living inside our library package, local packages. And this final line here, file.edit, is an RStudio API call that will open it immediately in the window. Some of these now are really specific to using RStudio. If anyone's not using it, this won't work, but we all do. So we decided to sort of make that a requirement for some of these files. And so finally, I'll show you kind of a working version of this in action. So here we are in RStudio. The Sorenson Impact package, and I'm going to show you the draft function here. So we pop up, we've got different versions for whether it's a presentation or a full report, or different ones we might come up with later on. We give it our file name, example report. There's our new file. It's ready to go. It's based on the template. We've also created a folder named the same as our final example report. There's the actual Markdown document, and then there's the second templates, all the necessary supporting files. So it's ready to go. You can knit it as is. And there you go. There's our branded Word document. Now the other nice thing, sort of that got set up by setting up the folder structure correctly, is that our studio actually knows to look inside installed packages to see if they have any templates in them. And because of that, you can use the GUI Markdown documents in the same way. So you'll see here's our Sorenson Impact IO slides presentation. We name it example presentation. Hit OK. Again, the same thing happens. There's our template. We've got a new folder called example presentation that has the RMD. This template folder has the specific files necessary for the presentation. They're different than the Word document. So it only copies the ones that are necessary for the specific one you're working on. Ready to go. So you can see there's an example slide with bullets, getting it. Here it is. There's our slide with bullets. All right, so this is like effortless, easy, one line, we're ready to go. It's all set up. This definitely simplified, shortened our work stream to create these things. So obviously there's one sort of piece that we need for a package to really make it complete, which is, of course, the hex sticker. So there's even a package to make hex stickers now. There's a package for everything. There you go. Any questions about the package?
Did you do anything with the PDF and LaTeX?
We haven't yet because we just don't use those. If we're going to make a PDF, we'll just print from Word to PDF at this point. With IO slides, if you just load it up in Chrome, save as PDF, it seems to work pretty well. And we only do that at the very end of a work stream sometimes. So it hasn't been necessary enough to make it an automatic process.
If anyone's interested, I have done that before, so I'm to know about that. So,
and if you're doing HTML, you can just put like a custom CSS file in the same spot that you're putting all these other files.
Exactly. Yeah.
Quick question on the slides. I guess were those Beamer slides then, or
these were IO slides. Yeah.
What's the work for customizing IO slides?
There's a good bit on our studio's website. There's also, obviously Stack Exchange is where we go to anytime. We'll spend most of our day, finding things there instead of actually learning how to program. So, yeah.
Those, that is learning how to
Thank you.
Package available too, so you can kind of see all the formatting that went into this. Paste, change, etc. Yeah.
So from the time you say, okay, we're done with our analysis now, to creating presentation documents, what's that iteration time for you guys?
Yeah.
I know you never actually usually say okay, we're done, but suppose
sometimes we have to. Yeah. I'm going to get a little bit into this at the end. I'm glad you asked that because I think it's important. I've seen that there's a few opinions on this. I'd be curious if anyone has any strong thoughts. Do all the analysis in plain vanilla R scripts, just a .r. Save all the output to some folder, some directory, and then knit together a presentation. And so sometimes this is like the crowning, the capstone on already a full analysis. But there's no reason you have to do that. I mean, especially if your data is not the way ours is usually not. Feel very Trumpian saying. But if your data is not too big, then it's pretty easy to just keep it contained in one RMD. And then you can just and then it's a single knit button, right? Separating your analysis from your final document. We just did this thing where we had to do presentations for dozens of places, kind of subtopics, which fed into a large presentation. And so we would knit all those presentations, so everything would be in an RMD. And then we would also do the separate SIGG save to save the plots. save explicitly would be like the final presentation. And then we knew where to find those in our final RMD. So I think it kind of depends on the complexity of the analysis and, you know, and the size, right? Like if you're doing a huge munging project on some really big data, you may not want to put that in an RMD chunk, even though you can, because you might want to just do that separately and then save it for your, you know, visualization or something. But I don't know, any other thoughts on how to like flow? Great. So I'll, maybe some of this will be elucidated too on the automating piece. Let me just set up like an old method so you can kind of see the difference, how much easier and better it's become. This on my blog from not even that long ago was my like idiosyncratic way of building a dashboard. I worked for a city before this, and we wanted to do this daily dashboard for the mayor. At the time, there weren't R Markdown notebooks, and there wasn't an easy way, but there was knitter. And so was a file called RHTML, which you could then knit into regular. But what this meant is instead of like having all of these great resources that come with notebooks and HTML docs and everything else that's come in the meantime, I like wrote the whole dashboard in HTML and JavaScript. You can see it in this, and I'll point it out over here too, that R inline functions would call the data. And then you would go in and like knit this. Like you kind of had to, yeah, like I had to bring myself up to speed in HTML and JavaScript and CSS and everything else in order to do the dashboard. Just did another dashboard for another city. It took me like 1/100th of the time because I did it all in R using like R Markdown. Might be to create this, knit it together, and I mean, surprisingly, this dashboard's been going pretty much every day since I left the city. It just knits it together. It's this old technology, still works, but it was a pain, because you can see you're like, instead of doing the analysis really simply, so you have to have all the objects ready. By comparison, now you could write like 1,000 dashboards and do 100 reports and just knit it together using R Markdown. So we were doing a project where we were analyzing crime trends for the state of Utah. And we had to first look at the state overall. And then once we had that, we realized, oh, you know, it wouldn't be too hard to do this for every single county. And was somebody who interacted with all the counties. And so we were interacting regularly with like county managers from San Pete, Utah, all these various Utah counties. So, so what we wanted is to just like take our report template that we used for the state overall and then create all these different kind of reports. So in this code here, you'll see in our list of counties, it's like render this report and paste it as a docx, and then put the output directory, save it like that. So what's happening in addition to this is there's a little R script, you know, that contains this, and then there's an R&D. R script does some analysis, so it'd say like Utah data county, which is in the for loop. So basically, it's just so easy now, right, to create documents and reports that we came to our with the stack this big of papers, and they're like, oh my God, you created a report for every county. It's like, yeah, magic, right? All in Word. So let me describe like a new method. You know, this would be a way that you could automate some of your other work. Like let's say house and need to do you know, fake news bulletin every day. So you create a script that loads the data, say from like Google Sheets or wherever you pull it from, Breitbart. Render the report from the R&D, save the output, and then email the result to your cronies. And I'm sorry for not going too deep in this. I'm again including a couple links that will help you along this task. I've used both cron and Windows Task Manager. Dashboard, it still blows my mind. Every time I look at it, I'm going, wow, this thing hasn't failed. It's on a Windows desktop. Just chugging away every single night at 2 a.m. producing a dashboard board that the mayor looks at. But we'll have edits, but this is a pretty easy method, right? It calls the script, it renders the document that president that is automated by cron. So that's it. So facility of automating now is like mind-boggling. Maybe just close on best practices, and I kept this purposely blank in case anybody else had some great thoughts on this, because some people really think that the best practice is you have a bunch of R scripts that do the heavy lifting. All like presentation is done in R Markdown, but that way, it's pretty easy to kind of keep track. And if you're doing some big analysis, I don't know. I still like stick with R Markdown when I know I'm going to create a presentation or report. Ultimately, I like R scripts, but I also like that inline code chunk to show our Studio browser, show me what I'm going to see when I'm done. So I think this is up for personal preference, but one that's probably not. Ironically, I have not named the chunks of this presentation, but I probably will before I start. But everyone would agree that you should name your chunks of your document, so you're not. Because I hit that error, like copied and pasted it, forgot to rename it, trips it up. It's like, why didn't I just name everything and think about that? Or just not name anything. Maybe that's the best practice. Creating the template, so you have that as a go-to. The package is one thing, but just to rehash everything, make everything simple. They integrate nicely with RStudio. It's so easy to combine your code and your analysis. You then get your custom style, and once you have that, why not package it up? Just make it that much easier. And then after that, you're making a report for every county in the country, should you want to. So I think we'll end there, and if there's any questions, comments, final thoughts.
So a need that has come up for me is some low level of interactivity, specifically just tooltips on plots to have your plot look right, but then also your manager wants to be able to float over it and see the number like they would in any sort of vendor software. You can't embed HTML interactivity in Word, right?
Yeah, I think you're stuck with static plots there.
So there are packages that handle that kind of stuff, but that is a topic for another day. But yeah, those kind of it's best done with G graphics, and you can embed that kind of data into it. So there are packages. We can try and find somebody who does that kind of stuff.
That'd be interesting. I will say one potential solution, and I've used this in the past, is another really nice format for the output is so GitHub Markdown. It'll specifically create a GitHub Markdown document, push out. And if you're using mostly JavaScript, as I imagine you probably are for some of these interactive plots, like tooltips, simple stuff like that, you could have in the GitHub or Gist or wherever you're saving it, like a nice interactive document and give them a URL instead of a Word doc. Yeah, I mean, most of our clients are kind of more the static type, but for the ones that want the dashboards and the interactivity, uploading to a blog, like Blogdown, something like that, or anything along those lines, I think.
Of course, there's always Shiny apps.
Yeah, Shiny apps, of course, yeah.
We're sending them an HTML
Right, that's
file, because the template will knit to HTML, get all of the same pretty stuff.
Sure.
The only problem I ever have with that is that I send people HTML files, they try to open them from their emails. And no email client seems to know how to open an HTML file. They have to download it.
That's just
It's the stupidest thing. Yeah.
That's funny, yeah.
There is really.
They're troubleshooting them.
That's right. No, download it first, then double click.
I think there is room for a solution between a full-blown app, interactivity with a tooltip, or maybe a really simple pivot or checkbox or something like that. Something that doesn't require an app, because it's just you can do it all in HTML.
Yeah.
But it's
I
like
agree.
you say, where sending an HTML link has its own downsides too, and a lot of people, it's hard for them to conceive of the idea of in a browser, like, oh my god, where are you hosting all this? No, hold on, it's just it's gonna be okay. Take an nitroglycerin. Calm down. It's gonna be all right.
Yeah, exactly.
A paid option, and is
for usually like internal use, but like our Studio Connect, you can do that. Like you publish HTML. We pay for it, and then you send links to people, and they click on links, and they go to it, and you put any kind of, like you use like Plotly, you know,
Yeah.
and
That's
yeah, it's so, but it wouldn't be for like external clients. Sprout would be for, you know, it's like we have it behind the firewall. You know. It fills that kind of void like amazingly well, as a way to like publish. Yeah. Like for example, like we don't publish our stuff to GitHub, our internal like GitHub Enterprise anymore because we have too many people who need to look at it and not enough logins, like for everyone in marketing and sales and everything. So we publish on our Studio Connect, and then they can all come and see it there. That's cool. And so we only have to pay for seats for us.
Do you know how much this I mean, that sounds like a pretty sweet option. I think the ultimate better option is everyone in the whole world downloads, gets our studio. All right. Any other thoughts? Well, listen, thanks so much. I just wanted to make one last plug, which is at Sorenson Impact, you have a data science student fellows program. And so if you are a student, or if you know students who are interested in applying their skills in the kind of public sector, please talk to me and we'll show you how to apply. Oh, sorry, yeah.
So I just have, an announcement. My name is Jeremiah Samari. I am the manager of the Research Center, and we're looking for an individual who has communications skill sets. So there's an opening right now. So anyone here in this room or anyone knows someone to be considered Utah's job seeker.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone. I understand there's a class here at 1. So
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much. Amazing. And I feel like I'm gonna go make a package right now.